The newly appointed factory manager, Robert, took on jobs with unrealistic deadlines. Of course, we couldn't meet them, leading to delays. However, he pushed all the blame onto me. When I vented about Robert's selfishness to my wife, Linda, she said, "Wait, isn't he the one who?" It seemed like she knew something about him. I'm David, in my early 50s. Married, living with my wife, Linda. We don't have kids but live happily together. I've hopped between various companies and am now employed in a manufacturing plant through mid-career recruitment. I serve as a department manager there. I'd love to become a factory manager someday, but the company policy requires a bachelor degree for that position, which I don't have. So, I can't become a factory manager. However, I do believe I'm competent at my job. Within the factory, my extensive experience allows me to assist in areas outside my direct responsibilities. This experience has enabled me to coach my subordinates, sharing tips and guidance. This led to not only my subordinates but also the factory manager relying on me, despite being a mid-career hire. Sometimes, I even offer advice to him, making me virtually involved in his work. But officially, I'm just a manager. It's times like these I regret choosing work over further education after high school. But, having started working at a young age has allowed me to network with people from other factories, which is a plus. That's how I've been living my days. However, one day marked a significant change in my daily routine. That day, we were informed about a change in the factory manager position. Simultaneously, the new factory manager was introduced to us. His name was Robert Miller. He graduated from a top university, and his father is the president of the company. On paper, he's an elite. But he tends to overestimate his abilities. Having graduated from a top university, he looks down not only on high school graduates but also on those from regular universities. He despises the factory workers and always talks down to them. And does not all. He belittles others based on their educational background and position. For instance, when a subordinate pointed out a mistake Robert had made, he exploded, saying, "You're 10 years too early to be pointing things out to me." Even though we were just trying to help by pointing out a mistake, Robert, possibly due to his high pride, refused to listen to any of our opinions. He looked down on us for our educational backgrounds and wouldn't listen to anyone. Within a week of his appointment, Robert was disliked by all his subordinates. A month after Robert became the factory manager, he summoned me. "I've secured a job, so start working on it immediately," he said. And it was with a major client, no less. I was somewhat impressed that he had landed such a big job. But then he added, "The deadline is in 2 weeks, so hurry." 2 weeks, I exclaimed in shock. The deadline was too short. Looking at the workload, it was clear that it was impossible to complete in 2 weeks. Even with the most optimistic estimates, it would take at least 4 weeks for such a major task. It was easy to foresee that this task couldn't possibly be done in just 2 weeks. Wondering what kind of tricks he used to secure the job, it turned out he had accepted it with such an unreasonable deadline. "It's impossible, Robert. It's unfortunate for our client, but we need to delay the deadline." I advised him that the deadline was absolutely impossible to meet. But he dismissed it, saying, "You've just been slacking off until now. If you work your fingers to the bone, you'll make it, right? Now get to work immediately." He wouldn't listen at all. I realized arguing further would be futile. Reluctantly, I headed to our subcontractor's factory. "I know the deadline is unrealistic, but could you possibly do your best?" I asked for their cooperation to make this job a success. I also asked my subordinates, knowing it was a lot to ask, if they could work overtime. I was prepared for their resistance. but my worries were in vain. "If it's a request from you, we're happy to help," they said, agreeing to my request. I thanked the subcontractors and my team, and we all got to work. As a manager, I had a responsibility. So, I worked as hard as the others, not wanting to be outdone. All to meet the deadline. See you tomorrow. At the end of the overtime, my subordinates were exhausted. So, I sent them home first. As for me, I stayed behind in the factory to work alone. Some tasks required multiple people and were impossible alone, but there were tasks I could do by myself. To reduce my subordinates' burden, I decided to work on what I could alone. This went on not just for one day, but night after night. Consequently, I started coming home late at night more frequently. Linda was worried about me coming home worn out every late night. "Are you okay? If it's too hard, maybe you should take a break from work." "I'm fine. Don't worry." To reassure Linda, I kept up appearances every time I came home. It was the 10th day since we had started the work. I was nearing my limit. I couldn't focus my eyes, and my hands were shaking too much for precise work. And I wasn't the only one at my limit. Due to working long hours every day, my subordinates were starting to show signs of fatigue. Despite our hard work, the end was nowhere in sight. This situation continued, and it was mentally taxing. Work efficiency clearly dropped, and we were truly at our limit. I realized that at this rate, we'd all collapse sooner or later. So, I decided to end work at noon by myself. When I reported this to Robert, he didn't approve. "What will you do if the deadline is delayed because you took a break?" I understand that, but everyone is at their limit. Continuing like this will only harm our health. I continued to plead desperately. After some thought, Robert finally nodded. "I'll allow it. But remember, if we miss the deadline, it's on you." It seemed he was okay with it as long as he could blame me in the worst-case scenario. Though typical of Robert, I was relieved to have gotten permission to rest. As planned, we ended work at noon and sent everyone in the factory home. That day, when I returned home exhausted, Linda had prepared my favorite food and drinks. I splurged a bit, hoping it would help ease your fatigue. Grateful for her thoughtfulness, I devoured the meal she had prepared. I relished the food and ended up drinking several glasses of alcohol, something I hadn't done in a while. Soon enough, I was drunk and began to vent about Robert. "It's impossible to meet such a deadline. That's just absurd. It's power harassment." Though I didn't remember it, I seemed to have said something along those lines. Is there really someone like that? What a terrible person. Yeah, really. Oh, if only Robert wasn't the factory manager. At this point, I mentioned Robert by name. Linda reacted to the name. "Robert, what's his last name?" "Miller, Robert Miller." When I revealed his full name, Linda began to ponder with her chin in her hand. "Robert Miller. No, it couldn't be," she muttered to herself, lost in thought. Drunk as I was, I didn't pay much attention and simply fell asleep. The next day, we returned to our tasks, trying to switch gears despite enjoying the previous night. But by then, everyone knew we would definitely not meet the deadline. The deadline was impossible from the start. It was to be expected. Despite our efforts, we ended up delivering past the deadline. Still, finishing in 3 weeks was quite an achievement under normal circumstances. However, because we missed the deadline, Robert summoned me. "You remember our agreement, right?" "Yes." "The delay is your responsibility. Therefore, you are fired." As promised, I was dismissed. After getting fired, I packed up my belongings at the factory. I had finished packing up and was about to head out. That's when I accidentally overheard my subordinates talking. "Did you hear? The manager got fired. But it's for the best. Jer, he's better off not being here." They were having that conversation. It seemed my subordinates were actually pleased that I had been fired. It was a shock, but upon reflection, I realized I had indeed asked them to do the unreasonable many times before. Their resentment was justified. It was my own doing. With no room for argument, I left without saying a word. The next day, I accompanied Robert to apologize to President Anderson, our client. "We apologize for the delay. The entire responsibility lies with David," Robert explained to him. "He seemed to blame everything on me. He's been fired immediately, so could you please forgive us? Come on, it's your fault, so apologize properly." No matter how I think about it, it was his fault for taking on an impossible deadline, and I can't accept that. But for the sake of the factory and my subordinates, this is nothing. I sincerely apologize for this incident. Then, he stopped me as I was apologizing. No, there's no need to apologize." With that, he turned to me and said, "Well, if you've been let go, it's perfect timing. How about coming to work for my company? I've known about your reputation for a while." Incredibly, he was offering me a job at his company. Wait, him? Robert was surprised and inadvertently expressed his true feelings. Mr. Anderson then explained why he wanted to scout me. Actually, he had worked his way up from the factory floor to his current position. That's why he has a deep understanding of how factories operate. He was aware that the conditions proposed by Robert were unrealistic. However, he was impressed by how much we had achieved in such a short period and was actually checking our progress. Furthermore, he revealed, "Actually, I was your peer back in the days on the factory floor." "Is that so?" "Yes, you helped me out when I made a mistake back then. Thank you for that." It seems I had once helped Mr. Anderson. Having worked at various factories, I can't recall exactly which one it was. I never imagined such a past experience would come in handy in this situation. What do you say? Are you interested in joining my company? Yes, I'd love to. I couldn't let this opportunity pass by. I eagerly accepted the offer from him. Though I had been fired once, I quickly secured a new job. Moreover, it's a significant step up in terms of conditions, so it's fair to say I've made a big leap forward. It's unlikely I'll ever go back to the old factory. Therefore, I decided to visit my subordinates to say goodbye. I knew they didn't like me, but they were my subordinates who had supported me all this time. I felt I at least owed them a word of thanks. When I told Linda about this, she said, "Then, I'll come with you. It's just a goodbye, you don't have to come." "Please, I want to check something." "Really? Then, let's go together." It was unusual for Linda to insist so strongly. So, I agreed to let her come with me. Upon arriving at the factory, my subordinates greeted me with smiles. Surprised but grateful, I gave each of them a small gift as I said my goodbyes. "Sorry for the hard times. Thank you for everything." Many of them were in tears. "It's sad to think you're really leaving." I was taken aback since I thought they disliked me. "I thought you all hated me for making you work so hard." "Nobody hates you, David. We're actually glad you got fired. We were worried you'd be exploited under that factory manager." It turned out I was mistaken about being disliked. They believed that I wouldn't be able to become a factory manager here and would just be exploited. That's why they thought it was good for me to leave the company and were happy about it. Knowing their true feelings almost moved me to tears. I was blessed with such great subordinates. Then, I guess it's time to say goodbye to Robert as well. After bidding farewell to my subordinates, I went to see Robert. Thank you for everything up to now. Whatever. Robert responded indifferently. It seemed he didn't like the fact that I was being scouted by a major company. Thinking it was just typical behavior, I was about to leave. But then, Linda made her move. So it was you after all, Robert. When Linda called out from behind, Robert turned to look at her. Suddenly, his face turned pale. Linda, he said, recognizing her in a tone that suggested familiarity. You seem to have taken advantage of my husband. Robert had kept being intimidated by Linda. Confused, I listened as she explained the situation. As it turns out, Linda is the daughter of a major company's president and had once been arranged to meet someone for a marriage meeting. That someone was Robert. His father is the president of a subcontractor for her father's company. That connection led to their arranged meeting. However, his arrogant attitude and derogatory comments about Linda's appearance led her to reject him. In the end, she refused him, and the marriage meeting was called off. He was severely reprimanded by his father, but it seems his character hadn't changed much since then. I'm terribly sorry for what happened then, and for causing such trouble to your husband. Sensing trouble, he apologized. For me, since this situation led to a better job opportunity, I was inclined to forgive him. But she felt differently. It doesn't matter what you said about me. I didn't take it seriously since you were only talking about me at that time, but I cannot forgive you for hurting someone important to me. I will make sure to report this to my father, she said, visibly angry. After saying that, Linda quickly left the scene. I followed her, leaving that place behind us. Things moved quickly from there. She reported his past behavior to her father. This information quickly reached Robert's father, who became furious with him. How many times will you repeat the same mistakes? I can't entrust the factory to someone like you. You're fired. He decided to fire his son. But it didn't end there. You'll get no more support from the family. It's time you made it on your own, he told Robert. Robert had often relied on his family's support in the past. After losing his job and finding himself alone, he was left to fend for himself, adrift and directionless. As for me, I was thriving in my new role at the company, quickly making a name for myself. My hard work was recognized, and I was given responsibility for one of the factories. Having achieved my long-held dream of becoming a factory manager, I was performing even better than at my previous company. Motivated by the support of my wife, I was determined to work even harder.